Hi, this is Andrew. Welcome to this week's Tech Talks podcast. We have a really special episode this week because this week is the 7 outcomes for success in software development. For us, this is a really foundational topic. In order to be successful, you must first define what success looks like. And so, as part of our methodology, we define success across a range of outcomes. This is a big subject, it's important, and so we're delivering this in 2 parts. So this week we've got part 1. So please sit back, enjoy, listen to our podcast on the 7 outcomes for success in software development. 3, 2, 1, and we are live. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of 345 Tech Talks. I'm Andrew. I'm CEO of Glue, which is the TripAdvisor for cryptocurrencies, our new venture launching this year. Really excited about it. And I'm also a co-owner of 345. And I have with me Paul Brown, and Paul is Chief Engineer and CTO of Glue, and also a co-owner of 345. And Paul is the technical brain of everything. I'm the one that says, "Is it done yet?" And that is quite relevant for today's talk because we're talking really about a little bit more about development process today. So today's Tech Talk is the 7 outcomes for success in software development. And this is something that we have talked about in the past. We've talked about the 7 outcomes, and today is the first time we're going to drill into those in a bit more detail, so we get an understanding as to why we do them. I mean, it's all very easy for us to rattle off, oh, here's 7 things. But they're there for a reason, and they're there because they help us understand, well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, it's a mindset thing. If you focus on what success looks like, you're much more likely to achieve success. Secondly, if you're not achieving success in these areas, it gives you pointers to look into where we can improve so that we do achieve success. So that is the point of the 7 outcomes of success in software development. And yeah, they're quite easy to find. This is the 345 website. For those of you on the video cast, www.345.systems. And if you just go to the main page, click start here, you will find that you come to the 7 outcomes. And the point is that this is what success should look like. And as we go through it, I'll just rattle them off now, and then we'll look at them in more detail as we go through. But the first outcome is rapid delivery. Everyone wants their software fast, right?
Of course they do.
Yeah. The next one is available and scalable. This is making sure that your service is there and it's reliable. It can meet demand. The third one is secure. Quality and bug free. Everyone wants everyone wants secure. Everyone wants quality and bug free. Everyone wants their costs to be optimized. We all like our software to be functional and lovable, to do what it's meant to do, and for everyone to love using it. And the last one, which is a bit of more of we'll talk about this in a bit more detail. It's not one that leaps to minds with people, but we find it helps us in other areas. It helps us sweep up some of the underlying problems that might be lurking, and that is standards compliant. So people might not get out of bed in the morning and say, yeah, I want my software to be standards compliant. However, the question really is, how easy are you finding it to be compliant with all the standards you need to be compliant with? Because most people are, but for some people it can be a real pain, and for some people it can be easy, and that's really where we're looking at with that.
And that's becoming a lot more important now, isn't it?
It's becoming a lot more important. I mean, particularly in Europe, GDPR, everyone's suddenly like, oh my God, GDPR. But if you run a website, there's accessibility standards. If you take card payments, there's PCI DSS. I mean, it's very easy for a normal business to start to stray into this area.
You can't escape.
Yeah, you can't escape, and you can, and you can either find it okay, or you can find it a real headache. So that's the last one, and one of the things these point through to, if I go next on the website, we come to what we call the Six Strata Model. So we've got a framework that sits behind the 7 outcomes, which basically is just it's our list of all the things that really you should be thinking about, grouped into themes. And so as we talk about the 7 outcomes and whether we're getting success in them or not, what that tends to do is that tends to point through some of the themes. So, again, rattling through this very briefly, we have a theme that we call determine, which is all the strategic stuff, planning for the future, the budget, technology, architecture. We have the develop theme, which is where all the development happens and all the things we need to worry about with development. We have the verify theme, the verify stratum, and that is where we do all the testing, and obviously the testing in QA. We have the release stratum, and that's where a lot of DevOps sits in there, but that's actually also where a lot of our infrastructure sits. And then we have the run stratum, so obviously and that's typically all the operations side of things. And last and most definitely not least, but the way we do it, that sits on the top of the pile, we have the team and all the things to do with people. So that's kind of a brief, very brief thing on the model. So do you have anything on that so far, Paul?
No, I mean you're doing a fantastic job at the moment.
Well, that's it. You see, on all the
the Six Strata, yeah, it's.
So on all the previous podcasts, Paul, you've been you've been the star of the show. So I had to do one episode where it's all about me.
We've got to give you a little bit of a go, right? So
you've got to give me some breathing space. Yeah. So coming back onto the Six Strata, one of the things I suppose if we then look at how we approach that. So one of the first things you do is, okay, you've got these 7 outcomes, but what does that mean in terms of, so we try to make it as what's the word? We try to take the subjectivity out of it. So one of the things I'm going to look at now is we've got a scoring method, and this is, we don't get any prizes for our scoring method. It's just a spreadsheet, but it helps us do the right thing. So I'm just going to quickly kind of show that on the other screen. So what we have is when you're scoring the 7 outcomes, against each one of them, we've got like a 0 to 10 scale. 0 means I'm the worst in the world at this, and 10 means I'm the best in the world at this. Through to the 3s and 4s are kind of, this has got a negative impact on my business, but we're functioning.
Room for improvement, isn't it?
Room for improvement. 5 is I'd like to improve, but I feel I'm okay. So 5 is, obviously 5, 0 is I'm the worst in the world, 10 is I'm the best in the world. 5's got to be kind of, we're okay. Through to 7, which is I compare well within my industry. 8, I'm one of the leaders in my industry. 9 is I'm the best in my industry. 10, I'm the best in the world. So it's like that. So it kind of gives those scores a level that you wouldn't get if you're just saying score yourself on 0 to 10 out of this thing. It's got some kind of criteria against it that try to make sure that you're looking at this in a reasonably objective way. So what we do then is, obviously we've got the next tab of the spreadsheet is quite simply those 7 outcomes and put a score against them of 0 to 10. And so if a client, for example, is coming to us and they say, look, I'm really having a problem with with speed of delivery, and I'm a 2 out of 10 on speed of delivery. My systems seem to be okay for available, but I give those a 6. But really, I'm really unhappy with the costs as well. So let's give the cost a 3. My quality is kind of okay, 5. Actually, we put a lot of stuff into security though, because we can't not do so. Let's say I'm an 8 for security. Let's say we're 6 for functional, and we're kind of okay meeting the standards. So that gives us, that's a kind of profile you might see. And then we look at that, and it's like, And what we can do is we just plot that out and look at the hotspots first, because what we want to do is we want to bring the standard up so that everything's green, everything's sort of 7 or above.
It's a ballpark, isn't it?
It's a ballpark,
I mean, no one's sort of looking at this. It's one of these things you do privately, so it's
yeah,
be honest with yourselves. But it gives you a not everybody can do everything all at once, so it gives you those areas to potentially focus on where you know that you're possibly a bit weaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
In other cases,
and typically, we find that we're kind of okay in a few areas, we're good in a couple of areas, and usually there's a couple of areas where there's some trouble.
Yeah.
And so that gives us the place to, because obviously it's the hot spots you want to go to first, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that is a lovely segue into the rest of the episode.
Yeah. So we want to effectively explore each one of the outcomes in a little more detail, right?
Yeah, and how we'd approach it, because it's like, okay, you've got a 2 out of 10 for rapid delivery. So what? The important thing is always asking the question why, isn't it? And how do we drill into that, and where does that lead us to? So what I'd like to do now is to go through some of the mindset stuff about how we use that to drill in. So how about we start off with that?
How about we start at number one?
How about we start at number one?
That's always a good idea.
Okay, so number one is rapid delivery. So rapid deliveries, like I say, it is the thing that a lot of people want. Well, everyone wants rapid delivery. And okay, you reach a point where it's like cost and rapid delivery and that sort of thing. But in terms of how we approach it, there's 3 main dimensions that I look at with rapid delivery. The first one being development velocity. As in, how quickly are the developers getting through tasks?
Yeah.
And so if it's obvious that if your developers aren't getting through their tasks, you're never going to have rapid delivery. But if that's what the problem is, if the problem is slow pace of delivery of work, then the question is why? And there are a number of things that drive that. I mean, one of them is obviously the choice of technology. Are you using the right tools for the right job? Have you decided to make a global scale, sharded data thing, but actually you're on SQL Server standard? Have you chosen technology that's fundamentally the wrong tool for the job? Have your developers got development environments that are preventing them from being productive? Are there
skills?
Is the design such that you've got this massive, horrible, tangled design that no one can understand, and so it takes everyone a day of scratching their head to do 2 lines of code? So there's the sort of technology and design aspect, and like you say, Paul, there is then the are my developers skilled to use this technology, or are they spending all their time reading articles on Stack Overflow, and rather than actually doing stuff, because fundamentally there's a skill gap, and this is obviously that might not be their fault, but one of the things is that for us as leaders, we're responsible for fixing it. So, if we've got to choose the technologies, but then we've also got to make sure that we have the right people with the right skills. And if we've got the right people but they haven't got the right skills, we've got to skill them. If we've got the wrong people, then we've got to get the right people. And there's a whole team thing there. And the other thing is, what else might we be looking at for tasks not getting finished off? I'm just asking that so I can have a quick slurp of coffee.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, skills is such a massive area. of potential concern, because you can look at these new shiny technologies that you think this change the world in my development environment, and then find that actually no one's got a clue about it, and then before you know it, you're into either training, trying to find the skills in the marketplace. That isn't always particularly easy. And then looking at doing sort of spikes or work packages, which doesn't necessarily lead to rapid delivery. I mean, a lot of these things are still, there's always going to be cases where you're going to need to do some sort of work package to figure out how to do something or how to use a particular technology and so on. That's part of, that's part of the process of building out your backlog, and figuring out where your known unknowns, right? So
but
I don't know this, so you actually you schedule that in as part of the backlog.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's a balance between how much of your backlog is that.
Exactly. So when we talk about rapid delivery, if 75% of your backlog is I've got a load of stuff I need to do that I've got no idea about, then that's not really actually helping you towards rapid delivery. So there's definitely a balance there.
And there's one more thing that springs to mind for me, and that is, I mean, some of it is development process. Is have you got a development process that's geared to rapid delivery? Are you doing the right things? And that also leads into mindset. So have you got a delivery focused mindset, or have you got do your developers have a mindset of I'm going to keep polishing this till it's perfect, or do they have I've got to make this good enough to be professional and then get it shipped? And there is an element of that as well.
That's true. And when you look at when you look at backlogs, or you produce backlogs, you tend to break it down into individual tasks, and those tasks are very focused on what they need to do. However, developers, and having been a developer and still code, the temptation is to not just do the task, but to stray outside the boundaries of the task and maybe fiddle around with this bit of code over here and then fiddle around with that bit of code over there. And before you know it, you have a commit that actually is the sort of the task plus.
Yeah,
you've ended up doing more than what the scope of the task is, and that really does affect velocity, because it affects the way you measure.
Yeah, and it's taken longer than the task would have taken.
Exactly.
And
then you never get a true reflection on
Yeah, and it's actually, and as a from a management perspective, that's actually a really hard thing to keep a lid on, because typically, and developers tend to be a similar personality type, and they tend to want to do things properly. I mean, it's a typical thing of developers that they've got a lot of pride in their work and they want to do things properly. And and if they see that something isn't quite right, they naturally they want to fix it. And actually finding the right balance between get this thing out of the door, and actually if we don't fix this now, it's going to bite us later. That's a constant that's a constant balance, isn't
it? It is definitely a constant balance. It's also a little bit of discipline, because whilst yes, okay, I can appreciate that some things are probably reasonably easy to just tweak and fix, but sometimes there are also things that actually end up they end up it starts off looking like a small fix and ends up becoming a refactor, and it's having the discipline to be able to say, yes, we know we need to do this.
I will create a backlog item for it.
I will create a backlog item,
and then we'll talk about it. And then and then it'll go on, and
And I have a constant battle of saying, yes, well, I know we need to do these things, but let's create tasks for them, put them in the backlog, and then do them at the appropriate time.
Yeah.
Because this is it does cost time. But at the same time, wanting to continue to achieve the right level of quality moving forward.
Yeah.
So
and it's always
about the balance. It's tricky.
Yeah, but the real way to do that is to capture them on the backlog, and someone like yourself at a CTO level or a senior architect level, make sure that there's a balance between prioritizing those things on the backlog. Look, to sort of say, okay, we've got to do these backlog things for features, and we've got to do a few of them for
the
quality
depth,
for
effectively.
quality and design. Um, yeah, I want to keep moving on with this because we've got a lot of ground to cover,
Oh, no, we have, yes.
and we only have 24 hours. Uh, no, no. Please,
Give
please,
me our
please,
seven
please,
outcomes, and this
please,
is the first one. Yeah.
please, listeners, bear with us. It's not going to be 24 hours. Uh, I know that our podcasts tend to be wholesome in their in the amount we provide. We provide a lot of value, but we do need to move on. So the next one. So okay, we've done dev velocity quite a lot, but another dimension I use for delivery is release cadence.
Yeah.
What is your release cadence? Because that actually goes to another area, and there be dragons really. It's not uncommon for, shall we say, large institutions, large companies that have got mission critical systems that they've been developing over 20, 30 years to have, for example, we release twice a year.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. If you were, and so there's a gap between what is the appropriate release cadence for your business and where are you now, and where do you want to be and where are you now, because ideally, the ideal, the nirvana is continuous delivery, isn't it? It's like I if you need to fix a bug, you fix it, it goes through your testing cycle, goes to production, and it's done. And there's no hanging about. And if it's done badly, it's like I fix a bug and So what are the barriers? Why is it that you're not able to release as often as you'd like to? Because that is a real that's a real key question to ask, because and the barriers can be infrastructure related. It can be it's DevOps related. How automated is my deployment process? So how am I able to provision my infrastructure? How am I able to actually deploy and release my code? And another big area, another big blocker to release cadence is testing. That if you've got in any of those areas, in any of the areas of infrastructure, release and testing, if you've got manual stuff, then what you tend to find is the release cadence immediately suffers.
Yeah.
And and the more manual stuff you have, the more your release cadence suffers. The more your release cadence suffers, and so that really then brings us down to which of those are the hotspots there to fix. It's
also the other thing that could cause release cadence to suffer is potential compliance. If you have to have a certain level of sign-off, possibly within the organization at different levels, possibly external to the organization, because it needs to be audited, or there needs to be a tick in the box from some compliance person that that this release is okay to go out into production, and that will naturally cause release cadence to suffer. Yeah. And I've had that in the past with the pharma.
Yeah. But there are things that you can do with that. There are things you can do to help, and one of those is I will release into pre-production continuously, for example, so that you can there's that kind of you can get as far as you can on a continuous delivery, even though you know that periodically you've got to go from a particular point and get that signed off. But that's no excuse to back all that up all the way through your pipeline, though, is it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you say that, but with it
happens though. It's very easy for it to happen.
You still need sign off to go into pre-production, so it does impact on release cadence.
Yeah, but then you have pre-production, don't
you?
Yeah. Which often we call our integration environment or something like that.
Developer workstation. Yeah. No.
So that's release cadence. So out of the three dimensions of velocity, the other one I think is related to release cadence, but isn't the same as it, and it can't. And this also, your farmer examples are good in here, and that is, what is the lead time between me writing a line of code and it reaching production? because release cadence and lead time are can be two halves of the same thing. But if you notice something that's broken, how long does it take to get a fix?
Mm.
And if that's 6 months, that's pretty bad. If that's 6 minutes, that's pretty good. Whereabouts in that continuum are you? Because it's so those are the kind of so those really are the main things I think we look at in terms of rapid delivery. And that actually, like we've just said, even with that, it's kind of led us into, well, is it team and skills? Is it technology? Is it process? Is it testing? Is it DevOps? Is it infrastructure? We've already, even with just how good's your rapid delivery, we've actually gone a long way into finding where we should be looking at.
And rapid delivery does encompass a lot of each of one of those things.
A lot of practices. There's a lot of the whole set of practices that we want actually affect rapid delivery massively. So that's why it's always number one.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the next one?
So number 2 is available and scalable.
So obviously this is a big area.
Yeah, it is a very big area. Yes.
And really, this covers a lot of the sort of non-functionals, but available and scalable can, are different sides of things. So what would be, for example, the main things you'd look at, Paul, with availability? And what would you drill into on those?
It's resilience. So how resilient is your system?
Yeah. So can I tolerate the loss of? I mean, it used to be, can I tolerate the loss of a SCSI drive? Through to, can I tolerate the loss of a data center? Isn't it? It's like
exactly. So how resilient is your system to failure? Where failure can come in lots of different ways, right? So it could be failure at the software level. It could be failure at the hardware level, at the environment level. And it's, how do you deal with that in order to ensure that your system remains available?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of asking the question, it's we sometimes need to be careful about how we ask this, because and there's a difference between, hey, I've had really good availability this year, compared to, I'm actually resilient. So although we kind of say available and scalable because they're the outcomes, actually, when you sort of prod a little bit, you can have no resilience whatsoever and be lucky.
And that's true, actually. Yes.
And one of the things that, I mean, I know that you've made a note on, is that's where things like recovery time objective and recovery point objective come into it, because they, you can fudge your availability by being lucky, but your recovery point and recovery time are the ones you can't really fudge.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of the lucky factor. When we talk about like 5 nines and 4 nines of availability and so on, it's I've never heard of apply the lucky factor to,
I know,
to 5 nines of availability. Yeah.
But it does happen though, in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
In that,
right.
If your systems are on fire, suddenly, you might find that senior management start investing in them. And if they're not on fire, they say, well, that's not really a priority for the business right now, is it? And that's only human nature. That's kind of, where can we deploy our resources for best effect? And and so you can superficially seem like you're available, even if the engineers know that there's work he's doing. But let's talk a little bit about the RPO Rto and what and what you'd use in that, and what you'd be looking to do with that.
So I mean, generally they're the two metrics, or the two parameters by which you build a disaster recovery plan around. And so they tend to be more sort of SLA type figures that you want to achieve in the context of a disaster, right? So when we say disaster, it's quite often data loss. So so the recovery point objective is how much data am I willing to lose? How much over a period of time? So over a period of time, how much data can I tolerate in terms of loss?
Yeah.
Within my disaster recovery plan. And then recovery time objective is how long will it take me to restore a working service for my customers? Now, the restoration of a working service may not include recovering the lost data. So there may be a completely out of band process by which you go about recovering the lost data within the RPO parameter. But it's, how quickly can I get a system up and running so that I can continue to service my customers? And so that's what the RTO is. Now, some DR plans will say actually that there should be no data loss whatsoever, and they're difficult to achieve. But then you need to start looking at, well, how do I architect the system such that actually my system is extremely highly available, right? So I'm cross data center. Maybe I'm geo-replicated. It's real-time replication. It's synchronous replication.
Can I just ask though, disaster recovery, is disaster recovery now an outmoded thing? Because it used to be, disaster recovery, you'd kind of, going back a fair bit, it was like, everything's gone down. Oh, we'll get it back up again tomorrow somewhere else. And in the modern world, that's kind of, we don't tolerate that anymore. And so has disaster recovery kind of been a bit, is that really still a thing?
I think so. I think it still has, some good principles to think about when it comes to data safety.
Yeah.
And also, not forgetting, lots of companies out there, they don't have the advantage of looking at applications from a greenfield perspective.
Yeah, because
we're building a brand new system now, then of course you'd have a lot of technologies to help you with.
Yeah, and we'd like wave our cloud magic wand and then say, we've got 5 data centers now.
We've talked about Kubernetes in the plant in previous episodes, and so you can start to look at all these really new tools that make it much easier to build a highly available system. But that's not the case for the majority of companies out there with more legacy systems and so on. So disaster recovery is still, it's still a key piece, or should be still a key piece in the way that companies run their systems and think about ability.
And so when we're looking at this, I mean, what we tend to find then, just to kind of bring this back to the framework, is that if you've got problems with RPO or RTO, effectively these are problems that tend to come down to solution design and the technology you're choosing, the solution design, and how all that is set up. Those are those kind of questions are really in that sort of solution and technology area, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're running on a technology that I don't know, let's say take SQL Server, for example, or any type of sort of relational database that's been around for some time. So transaction orientated, it will be creating log files for your transactions. And so you start to think about, well, I need to take regular backups. I need to back up or log ship my transaction logs, but knowing full well that it's an asynchronous process, it's not going to be running in real time.
Yeah.
You're going to be, thinking about, well, how often can I log ship? Get the data off my site so that I've got it safe somewhere that I can use it to recover from. It's just a fact of life that the RPO becomes potentially in the order of If you're lucky, 5 minutes. If people start thinking 15 minutes for log shipping, and to those sort of orders of magnitude. Now, if you're running in the cloud and you're using cloud storage, if you're in Azure using blob storage, then you can geo replicate and it will do it for you. Just put on the option to say I want to geo replicate,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you've got triple copies of your data that you've log shipped to blob storage in other regions. But if you're running on premise, you've got to think about these. You've got to think about the RPO and what can I achieve with the technology that I have in order to be able to minimize the impact of an outage that will cause business.
Yeah, and on one of the sort of the other sides, the reason why I've got available and scalable, because the thing that ties quite close into this is the scalability as well, isn't it? Because scalability is ultimately your ability to add more machines in to help share the load, and adding more machines in tends to also help you make you more available. So they're quite closely linked. Is there anything else particularly about scalability that if we're not happy about scalability, are there any other pointers that in there?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that they are tied. They are tied together, except that obviously scalability is more about how can I achieve my performance targets. So you might have you were saying about having a highly available system without resilience by being lucky. You can have a highly available system, but where your customers are experiencing 30-second response times in the browser.
Yeah.
So you've got a very highly available system. It never goes down. The service is always there,
but it might be rubbish.
But your customers are getting a really poor experience.
Yeah, and there's actually another one here, and this is one that's actually quite important. I mean, we know, we've dealt with it many times in the past where a lot of business systems have particular peaks of load, and so let's say you buy 1,000 servers to meet your Black Friday peak, and the rest of the year you only need 10. I mean, the scalability works that way as well, because if you can't scale down when you're in a quiet time, then ultimately have you expended far too much capital coping with a peak that that literally might be your Black Friday, when actually that is a rare event. Do you have for example, let's accounting software, you might have there might be a quarterly peak when you do VAT returns or something. In a lot of business scenarios there are particular points in the year, points in the quarter, points in the month where a lot of stuff happens, and then the rest of the time you're relatively quiet. And if you can't scale down for those, then you've got a lot of sunk cost, which which you've got to bear.
Yeah, you've got a capacity plan for your peaks, and when you're talking about buying hardware, that's an expensive approach, isn't it? Because you have to do it because best case scenario is that your system just is a lot slower, but people can still get stuff done. Worst case scenario is that your system fails because it cannot handle the load.
And this, but it's still kind of still drilling back though. We're still drilling back to fundamental questions about technology choice, on-prem versus cloud. How we add, but also how we scale down machines and all that sort of thing. We're still in the same kind of area, aren't we? With that?
Well, you are, but I mean, before the cloud, before platforms that treat servers as commodities that provide compute, storage, network. Before that, you built your environment for your application, and you spent a lot of money on your hardware to cope with your peaks.
Yeah.
The nice thing about fast forwarding to now, where you have tools like Kubernetes that allow you to potentially share lots of different workloads on the same hardware estate. So you can, you can cope with the peaks when you need to with one application, but when that application doesn't need that resource, then other applications can potentially use that resource for themselves. So that makes it the 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 investment, the sort of, what am I trying to say? So the use of the hardware, you're getting maximum investment out of.
Yeah.
Because you're able to spread the load across different applications across the same hardware. But that doesn't allow you to scale down. So I've spent a lot of money on 1,000 servers that I need sort of a fraction of the time in a year. Whereas most of the time, maybe I only need 100 servers. But it doesn't mean to say I can give 900 servers back when I don't need them. It doesn't really work like that.
Not if you bought them.
Not if you bought them. So when you're in,
I mean, there is kind of a middle ground on that, isn't it? Because you could have, even if you were buying physical tin for your own data center, you could have been, you could have had a whole VMware thing and the private cloud kind of thing, and been shifting, virtual load around, even if you've got your own servers. The time when you're really up the creek on this is running everything on direct on the tin, isn't it?
yes, yeah, and even virtualized loads. To be honest, I mean, you get denser. You're making more use of the hardware that you have, but unless you start to look at technology that allows you to scale back,
Yeah.
then I think you're always going to have that. You're always going to have that problem with certainly on-premise workloads, and that's the nice thing about the cloud is that when you don't need that, I mean, that's the ideal situation, right? I only pay for what I use, so when I don't need it, I just give it back.
Or even now, you can have hybrid. You can have hybrid as well. So
You can have
so you
hybrid.
can have on-prem for your steady state workload, and then maybe expand into the cloud if you've got peaks.
And there might be reasons why you need to have some operations on premise, and compliance comes back into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the ideal scenario is that you just rent what you need, and when you don't need it, you give it back. And that's effectively what the cloud model gives us. So if when we're talking about going from the past into where we are now, the combination of the cloud and tools like Kubernetes and so on really help us with being available and scalable, being very cost efficient at the same time.
Yeah. I think we better move on because we've got through 2 of the 7, and we're
So they're doing really well.
They're doing really well. The next one on the list is secure, and really the thing, everyone wants their stuff to be secure. And again, you're kind of also on the same thing here, that just because you haven't been, or just because you haven't had a public attack doesn't mean that you're not vulnerable. And so it can be a little bit difficult to tease out how secure you are. On the whole, I think most people seem to think they're quite happy with it, but I'm not sure if enough people are really looking for it. So one of the things that we'd look for with security is, I mean, the first thing is, how often are you getting, independent people, whether they're in your organization or whether they're from outside, how often you get independent people to security audit you, conduct penetration testing, all that sort of thing. It's not just, are you secure? It's have you been able to demonstrate that you're secure, and are you happy with the results? And I think that's the first part. Those are the first sort of questions we're asking here, isn't it? It's really about demonstrating.
Are you doing everything within your power, so to speak, to ensure that you are running a secure service? I mean, the reality is that these days everybody has to be running a secure service. It's just it's a part of running now production workloads that are publicly accessible. You have to be secure. So I mean, part of the challenge is saying that actually, it's difficult. Security is difficult. And generally speaking, it's a specialist skill as well.
Yeah.
So there's certainly no shaming saying that actually I need help in being able to not just run a secure service, but to make sure that my development process is secure, my operational processes are secure, my organization is
Yeah.
secure.
And so as we pull that down to our into our our Six Strata model, I mean part of that falls within the determined model. So that's where we're looking at the technical architecture and the solution architecture, and then part of it comes down into the really, I mean there's a security, there's definitely a very big security attack surface or defenses needed around release, and the whole thing of protecting code from the point of which it's written through to releasing it to make sure that people can't inject malicious stuff in there. But a lot of that comes in that's where we look at the run area, and we look at the operations, because we should be having operational security and making, there should be processes, like you say, to make sure that we are taking operational security seriously, that we are that we are regularly getting audited. The results of those audits are feeding back onto our backlog, and
Yeah.
things are being done about them. And the other thing that comes with that is also the operations. I mean, we have another part of our run thing is repeatable operations, which is shorthand for automate everything you can,
Yeah.
so that there isn't the opportunity for human attack. And the things you can't automate, you script, and so you can and so that people can only do things that they are authorized to by running scripts, and that everything else should be being fed back on the backlog so that we can do that. So there's some of those things that we're looking at which are kind of helping us with the with the security aspect of it.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, with security that security is not just making sure that you've got a firewall
Yeah.
and you've not opened inappropriate ports.
Security is for life, not just for Christmas.
Exactly. Exactly that, and it's a really hard subject, because people, just in general, developing software, you should always be thinking with a security mindset.
But
Always be thinking about everything that you're doing. What can I do to, are there any potential security holes in what I'm doing, and what can I
yeah,
do to?
and that's a really hard mindset. And
It is.
and actually, one of the reasons why you get people in is because it's very easy to naively be focusing on happy path, both in terms of your code. So it's this is what should happen with my software, and then you're not sufficiently defensive with how you cope with exceptions. It's the same thing with security. It's very easy to sort of say, well, I'm a good citizen, and so I'll think about how I behave without thinking, what would some nefarious individual, even in another part of the world where they're not going to get prosecuted or extradited, what are they doing? And it is a different mindset. And I think the short thing here is make sure you've got process for these things. Make sure you've got the people with the right skills, and if you haven't, you can buy them in.
Yeah,
And
and I think always make sure you get external validation of, if you're running a public service, then there's no better way than having effectively another set of eyes looking at
yeah,
it from an objective perspective. Of course, security though does put pressure on rapid delivery.
it
And
does. And actually, funny you should say that. That was one of the things that I meant to say.
yeah,
In that, I mean, particularly if you're the type of organisation, and we work with banks, we work with pharma, and that sort of thing. That those kind of regulated have to, it has to be done properly, kind of companies.
yeah,
And that the security guys there cannot approve something if they're not sure. And so there is always that challenge that if you're trying to bring in new technology, do stuff differently, bring in new processes, all that sort of stuff, the first thing the security guys say is, no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to approve this until I am sure. And so there can be particularly to go from a position where you've got like I mean the way I maybe you should have said this earlier, but it's like it, if you look at motor cars, it's no coincidence that in the very 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 early days of motor cars there were the, the companies called themselves coach builders because they literally came from the people that built coaches that were pulled by horses. And it was those companies that built motor cars, and they were coach builders, and they had this traditional kind of approach to stuff until like Henry Ford invented the production line, and the rest is history. And it's the same thing with software that very very much you're going from a coach building kind of approach where there can be this, you build this coach and it takes time, it's quite manual, and then you have this event of checking it all for security, and then and it gets released, and then it's like, don't touch it, it's secure, and that's bad security because that is not, it's not really, it's not always repeatable, it's not processed. And then what you want is to build. I mean, we try to build software on a production line model, when we're starting a new project, it's like you're building the software factory. So the way you do source control, the way you do the testing, the way you do the environments, and the way you release, and the way you do operations and the automation of all of that. It's like there's a lot of work that you don't really see, which is building a factory in the same way that if you were making a new model of car, you'd have to build a factory, you'd have to build a production line before the first one can even roll off there. And if you get that right, then you can build in security into that production model.
Absolutely.
But if you haven't got, because it's repeatable, and that's the key thing there, is that model is repeatable. When you do it right, and you've got the software factory, it is repeatable, and repeatable means that you can. It's a lot easier to secure it because it's going to be, if you make it secure, it's repeatably secure. And so back to the whole thing of anything where people have got access to, when people are deploying stuff and they go and they open up a window and run them some whiz and tick a few boxes, that's never repeatable, and it's never guaranteed to be secure, and you should always be locking that down.
Absolutely. You don't wait until the end of the process to do security.
Don't wait till the end of the process. It's
embedded as part of the process. We talk about SecOps, like DevOps and SecOps. It's fundamental, and you do it.
But the software factory is a nice segue into item 4. Quality.
We've done it for you.
Quality and bug free.
Wow.
I think we've got to move on.
So we've done 3, and we've got 4
to go. So actually, as you go through, there does become a bit of an overlap. So we do actually get. Honestly, listeners, we do actually get. Like I would like to take this opportunity actually to thank everyone that's been watching on YouTube, listening to us. We have, I mean, literally. I mean, there's literally been tens of people listening. No, I mean, we've been doing this three weeks, and we're kind of, we're it's like in the hundreds, so we're kind of really happy with that. It's been an amazing journey, so thanks for that, everyone. We've come to the end of our time for this episode. Please listen to next week's episode for the remaining 4 outcomes for success. So next week we'll be covering off quality and bug free. We'll be covering off costs are optimized, functional and lovable, and last but not least, standards compliant. So please join us again next week. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe on your audio feed, like us, subscribe on YouTube, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye now.